The wind that morning carried more than dust. It carried the kind of stillness that makes a man listen to his own footsteps. Elias Crowder rode through it with the patience of someone who had spent too many years talking only to his horse and the wide, indifferent prairie. The sun hadn't fully cleared the horizon yet, just a thin band of pale gold edging the earth. His hat brim shadowed his face, but the hard line of his jaw was enough for the folks in Gallows Ford to remember him, or at least remember what they thought they knew. They stopped what they were doing when he passed. A boy on the porch of the feed store squinted, a pair of old men muttered near the hitching post, and two women in bonnets leaned toward each other, their whispers quick as sewing needles. Elias didn't look back, but he could feel their words settle on him like dust. By the general store, a woman stepped out with a sack of flour balanced against her hip. Her cheek bore the shadowed bloom of a bruise, and her gaze was fixed somewhere near the ground. Three little girls trailed close, their dresses faded, but their hair combed neat, like someone still cared to keep them decent. On the porch across the way, the two women's voices rose just enough to carry. "That's the one who keeps giving him girls. Heard he near broke her ribs last week." The woman kept walking, but the smallest girl stumbled, and the sack of flour dipped dangerously. Elias noticed the way her shoulders tensed at the whispers, the way her steps quickened even though no one blocked her path. He didn't know her name yet, but something in the curve of her back felt too familiar. The saloon doors banged open. Roycewind came out smelling of whiskey and arrogance, a man who mistook fear for respect. He barked at the woman for taking too long, his voice a harsh cut through the morning air. Without ceremony, he grabbed her arm, fingers biting deep enough to leave marks. The flour slid from her grasp and hit the dirt with a puff. Elias swung down from his horse, the leather reins loose in his hand. He stepped between them without raising his voice. "Ain't your business, Crowder?" Royce spat, his breath sour. "Reckon it is now." The stillness between them was heavier than shouting. Royce's lip curled, and his hand twitched toward a knife at his belt. Elias didn't move except for the smallest tilt of his head, like he was measuring the man, weighing him, and finding him light. Royce's grin broke into something uglier, but after a long second, he shoved the woman hard enough to make her stumble into Elias's shoulder and stalked off toward the saloon. She stayed where she was, one arm around the youngest girl, the other holding the other two close. Elias looked down at her, his voice low. "You're coming with me." It wasn't a command, nor a question, just a statement spoken as though it had already been decided. She shook her head slightly. "I can't." "You can." She looked at her girls, then back toward the saloon, where Royce had vanished. The wind moved between them, warm now, carrying the smell of sun on dust. Her nod was small, but it was there. Minutes later, the girls were tucked in front of Elias on his horse, their mother seated behind, her hands gripping his coat. They rode past the edge of town without a word. The prairie stretched out, open and wild, the grasses bending in the breeze like a quiet kind of applause. Crowder's Hollow lay in a shallow valley, the cottonwoods ringing it like silent sentries. The ranch was modest, fence lines in need of repair, a barn that leaned a little, the steady creak of a windmill turning. Clara Wynne, as she told him her name that evening, kept herself busy from the moment they arrived. She cleaned, mended, fetched water, as though stopping might make her visible in a way she feared. Elias didn't tell her to rest. Instead, he left small things in her path, a loaf of cornbread on the table, a pail of warm water for washing, a mended quilt folded at the foot of her bed. The girls began to loosen in the space between days. They chased each other around the barn, their laughter startling at first, then steady as the sound of the windmill. One night, Clara stood in the doorway watching them, her hand over her mouth. In the lamplight, Elias saw the shine of tears in her eyes, but he looked away, giving her the dignity of privacy. Word reached town soon enough. Royce stormed into the sheriff's office, claiming his wife and children had been stolen. Sheriff Amos Bell, an old acquaintance of Elias, rode out to Crowder's Hollow. At the fence line, he leaned in his saddle. "Town ain't gonna like this," he said. "Folks will side with a man, even a mean one, before they side with a rancher keeping another man's wife. Elias met his gaze evenly. Ain't looking for their favor. From the porch, Clara listened. Something in her face shifted, a thought settling in. That he was risking not just his peace, but his place in the world for her and her girls. A week later, the trouble came. Royce returned under cover of night, bringing 2 men with him. They set the barn alight, the dry timbers catching fast. The girls woke screaming. Clara herded them toward the cellar, her own heart hammering. Elias went out into the firelight, his shadow long and solid. He dropped one man with a single blow, drove the other into the dark. Royce stood with a pistol trembling in his hand. "You leave her," Elias said, his voice carrying steady over the crackle of flames, "or you leave here in the ground." Royce's face twisted, torn between rage and the knowledge that this was not a bluff. The sheriff arrived, breathless from the ride, and by the time the smoke began to thin, Royce was in irons for arson and assault. The barn was half gone by morning. Elias and Clara worked side by side in the days that followed, hauling timber, stacking new beams where the ashes still smelled of smoke. One evening, as the sun dropped low and the grass took on the color of copper, she brought him a tin plate of biscuits. Her hand lingered over his for a heartbeat before she let go. Their eyes met, steady, unhurried. No words passed between them, but something had shifted. Some folks think rescue is a loud thing, guns drawn, horses running, dust rising in the wake of escape. But the truth is, rescue is quiet. It's the steady hand, the unspoken promise you ain't going back where you came from. That night, the wind carried the scent of fresh-cut lumber and warm bread, and for the first time in years, it didn't taste like fear. The days settled into a rhythm that felt both fragile and necessary. Morning light spilled across the valley, catching on the dust motes that floated in the barn's half-rebuilt frame. Elias rose before the sun, his boots sounding steady against the wooden floor. Clara was always up not long after, tending the stove, hair braided tight, moving with the quiet focus of someone who'd spent years trying to go unnoticed. The girls roamed freer now. Maggie and Ruth helped feed the chickens, their laughter carrying across the yard like bells, while little Lila trailed after Elias, offering him sticks as though they were tools. He accepted each one with the gravity of a man taking payment in gold. The sheriff came by twice more in those weeks, always to check if Royce had been seen nearby. He hadn't, though rumors swirled in town. Stories of him swearing he'd get his property back, men muttering in the saloon that Crowder was playing husband to another man's wife. Each time the sheriff left, Elias would pause by the porch, eyes scanning the horizon. Clara noticed, though he never spoke of it. One evening, rain swept in sudden and hard, drumming on the roof. Inside, the girls sat by the fire, braiding each other's hair. Clara was mending one of Elias's shirts, the fabric spread across her lap. The light from the flames caught the thin white scars on her wrists. Elias saw them when she shifted her hands, but he didn't ask. Instead, he poured her a cup of coffee, setting it gently by her side. She didn't look up, but her needle slowed. It was near midnight when the trouble returned. A horse's hooves struck the wet ground, muffled but close. Elias was at the door before the dogs even barked. Royce stood in the yard, alone this time, rain plastering his hair to his face. His voice was low, slurred but dangerous. "Give me my wife." Elias stepped onto the porch, bareheaded, rain running off his coat. "She ain't yours to give." Royce's hand went for the pistol at his hip. In the dark, with the rain hissing against the barrel, it could have ended quick. But Elias didn't reach for his own gun. He stepped down into the mud, closing the space between them with the slow, steady pace of a man who'd already decided what he'd do. Royce's breath came hard, his arm trembling. "You gonna shoot me, do it," Elias said, voice like low thunder. "Else you turn around and ride out." The moment stretched thin as a wire. Then Royce's eyes shifted, flicking past Elias, toward the warm square of light spilling from the doorway. Inside, Clara stood with the girls behind her, her face pale, but unflinching. Royce lowered the pistol an inch. The sheriff's voice came from the dark behind him. "It's over, Win." Royce was in irons before the rain stopped. The sheriff led him away without ceremony, his horse's hooves fading into the wet night. The next morning, the air was bright and clean, the sky scrubbed clear by the storm. Elias set about repairing the fence line where Royce had ridden through. Clara came to stand beside him, carrying a tin of biscuits wrapped in cloth. She handed them to him, and this time her fingers didn't pull back right away. "You could have killed him," she said quietly. Elias looked at her, the shadow of a smile in his eyes. "Didn't need to." She nodded, as though that answer settled something deep. Behind her, the girls ran through the grass, their dresses catching the light, their voices lifting into the morning. Clara turned to watch them, and for the first time since she'd stepped off Elias's horse, the set of her shoulders eased. Some rescues are loud, steel flashing, shouts cutting through the air, but the lasting ones are built in the quiet that follows, in the mending of fences, in biscuits wrapped in cloth, in the simple fact of staying when it would be easier to leave. Out here, the wind still carried dust, but it also carried the smell of rain-soaked earth and fresh bread cooling on the sill. And sometimes, when the valley was still, it carried laughter, too, the kind that made a place feel like home.